It's time once again to play the spin-off to one of the most beloved manga game shows in the world. Welcome to Is This a Josei? The rules are still very simple. I show you a manga, and you, the audience, try to guess whether it's a Josei or not. Are you ready? Let's play! First up, we have the cross-dressing ex-otaku classic, Princess Jellyfish. Is this a Josei? And you would be... Wait, I'm hearing from my producers now, and it seems that this series is a shoujo? Yeah? Okay, apparently this one is a shoujo. It won for a shoujo category in Japan. Sorry for the mix-up, you guys were all wrong. Princess Jellyfish is a shoujo. Let's move on to our next series, which is the older woman and younger boy romance series, Tramps Like Us. Is this a Josei? And that would be... Hold on. Yep, my producers are telling me this also won in the shoujo category in Japan. So this one is in fact a shoujo. Sorry to the viewers at home for the conflicting information, but let's move forward. Next we have... You know what? No, I can't do this. I quit. What the hell is even the point of this game show if we don't have a clear difference between what a Josei is or isn't? Does Josei even exist? How is this bit gonna even work again? Hey! How did you get in here again? Oh, shucks. Well, despite this being the second time that game show host broke into my house, they pose a decent question. It's incredibly hard to pin down the difference between what we as Americans know shoujo and josei as. Many people might think that the defining factor is the age of the characters. This wouldn't entirely be correct, however, because Library Wars and A Sign of Affection, which are both shoujos, have main characters over the age of 18. Others may think the defining characteristic of a josei is the mature content. This is also not true though, because there are shoujo series like Mars and Sand Chronicles that deal with heavy topics. As I've talked about in videos previously, shoujo and josei are manga demographics that are aimed at young girls and adult women respectively. Shoujo has an age demographic of around 8 to 24-year-olds, while josei is usually meant for those over 25. Although it does seem that many josei magazines are consumed more by a 40 and up crowd more frequently, as those are the main age demographics of two kodansha josei magazines, Be-Love and Kiss. There are common attributes of josei, which tend to have more explicit material because the audience is older, as well as josei being more about adult women dealing with marriage or working in an office. In Japan, josei is not a commonly used term to describe this type of media, unlike in the West though. Josei, or joseimuke, became more of a catch-all by critics around the 90s to just describe any feminine media, and is used more in the Western audiences to just describe a series that is meant for an adult audience of women. The term that is more commonly used in Japan for this demographic is just simply redikomi, or ladies comics. For the sake of the history section, I'm going to be referring to these types of manga as ladies comics, but I will revert back to the frequently used Western term josei again afterwards. Ladies comics, as we know the demo today, began in the 1980s. With the popularity of shoujo growing in the 1960s, many young girls who followed these series eventually grew out of manga that was intended for a younger audience. Similarly, young mangaka who helped bring rise to shoujo during the same time period also began new phases in their own life of getting married and having kids. This new batch of adult women mangaka and manga readers were wanting stories that could reflect their own lives rather than relying on the stories of young girls. During this time, we began to see magazines that were dedicated to an older audience of women, one of which being the first kodansha published josei magazine, Be-Love. This magazine is currently the home of such series as Chihaya Furu, Nina the Starry Bride, and Something's Wrong with Us. The traditional sense of what ladies comics entailed were about adult women dealing with marriage, children, or work environments. These types of stories were made for women that may find themselves in the same predicaments, but offer them a form of escapism from their mundane lives. Think along the same lines of how soap operas like Days of our lives are seen as a form of entertainment for stay-at-home moms or old ladies that are in retirement. You also had ladies' comics that focused on female pleasure and sexuality, as many women previously did not have stories like this that were for and about women. It could take the female body and entice the audience by showing them something that they themselves might not be able to experience in their own marriages. This sort of series became increasingly popular throughout the conception of ladies' comics. Moving out of the 80s and into the 90s though, ladies' comics started to become known as just excessively pornographic series. Due to this, a new type of ladies' comic began to emerge, known as young ladies' comics. This demographic got its name from magazines that targeted women in their early 20s that all contained the words young in the title, such as Young You and Feel Young. Some manga that have run in the now defunct Young You magazine were series like Honey and Clover, Papa Told Me, and Futago. Others that are currently running in Feel Young are Yowao Tokotako, Ikoku Nikki, and Golden Raspberry. While the category of young ladies comics isn't really used today, it serves as a big reason why we have a huge blur between shoujo and ladies comics. Young ladies comics were seen as an in-between for the two manga demographics. This kept young ladies comics from being stigmatized as pornographic, but also were able to be more realistic than shoujo ideals. The rise of young ladies comics led to ladies comics starting to incorporate more social and societal issues into their series, showing women in toxic work environments or struggling in their marriages and how to deal with these issues. With this addition of social issues in their series, shoujo, young ladies comics, and ladies comics all began to take inspiration from each other. They were competing with new emerging magazines for readership in a market that was gaining its footing and finding an audience. As ladies comics and young ladies comics grew in prominence, magazines found their niches or faded into obscurity before ultimately folding. Even with all that, the lines between what denotes a shoujo and what I will now be referring back to as Jousei are still extremely blurred. Someone call Robin Thicke. The best example for this is looking at manga awards presented in Japan that have the general, shonen, shoujo, and child's category. The general category tends to be where seinen and josei series will get nominated. However, series that are considered to be josei and published in what are considered to be josei magazines often end up in the shoujo category. Series like Papa Told Me and Bara no Tameni both won in the Shogakukan Manga Awards shoujo category, despite having been published in the josei magazines Young You and Petite Comic. Petite Comic, in which often depicts sexual relationships like in series Happy Marriage and Butterfly's Flowers. On top of that, both series being published in English under the Shoujo Beat label by Viz. This doesn't just happen with the Shogakukan Manga Awards, but with the Kodansha Manga Awards as well, where they also have these categories sectioned off by these four types, and many series that we would consider to be josei have won in the shoujo category. Kiss magazine titles, Tramps Like Us, Princess Jellyfish, No Dame Cantabile, and Perfect World have all won shoujo manga awards, as well as B-Love magazine series Chihaya Furu and Nina the Starry Bride winning shoujo awards too. However, two other B-Love magazine series have won in the general category: Yuria Sensei no Akai Ito by Kiwa Irie in 2019, and Waru by Jun Fukami in 1991, furthering the blurred lines between what truly makes a series a shoujo or a josei. Not many josei series win in the general category to begin with. Most recently this year, Do Not Say Mystery by Yumi Tamura, which is published in Monthly Flowers, won the Shogakukan Manga Award in the general category, as well as other notable series winning in this category like Kids on the Slope in 2011, and Descending Stories in 2014. My speculation on why these josei series won in the general category is that they show more realistic depictions of life rather than the typical shoujo idealism. In a paper by Fusami Ogi, they note the differing factors between shoujo and ladies comics is the portrayal of realism and sexuality that shoujo can never attain. I don't entirely agree with this sentiment, however, because quite often shoujo portrays sex or depicts realistic content that women women deal with. Series like Mars, Drowning Love, Nana, or Oku all have depictions of sex that are seen to be more realistic and are all considered to be shoujo. Shoujo itself was seen as having too much sex in the 2010s that a Harmful Books Act was put in place to keep these magazines from showing sexual situations. Currently, shoujo series like Coffee and Vanilla, as well as Yakuza Lover, are both light smut series that are made for an older teen audience. Though, granted, this paper was written by Ogi in 2003, and many of the series I just mentioned came after. If the argument is that the difference between shoujo and josei is realism, then that is a much harder distinction to gauge. In the same paper by Ogi, they seem to refer to series that have more realism as ones that don't typically have happy endings, but rather endings where a character just begins a new life. Stories where they struggle with an issue throughout the entire series, and by the end, they have fixed the issue, but they need to start anew. However, as I'm sure many people would know, not every josei series is like this. In fact, many probably have just the same amount of happy endings and happy couples as shoujo does. On the flip side, shoujo has just as many sad stories that depict real-life situations like Life by Keiko Suenobu, or depict life events like My Girlfriend's Child. This is also just my opinion, but when realism is equated to just sadness and depressing endings, it negates the fact that happiness is real and attainable. But that's a whole other rant on why works focused on happiness are seen as less serious. The distinction is confused even further once you introduce magazines like Melody, which for all intents and purposes is a shoujo magazine. Although the publisher does state that the magazine is intended for an older female audience. Many series that are published in Melody often do get confused as josei, such as Himitsu Top Secret, which is about a sci-fi crimes division, a topic that many people would probably never associate with a shoujo series. Other series that come from this magazine that often get confused to be josei are series like Kageki Shoujo, because it depicts trauma, and Oku, like I mentioned earlier, which is a period piece. Other shoujo manga that often blur these lines are series that started out in shoujo magazines and then maybe moved over to josei magazines a few years later. One case of this is Petite Flower, which was formerly a shoujo magazine that went under and was replaced with Flowers magazine in 2002. The same year that New Magazine started, two shoujo series that were running in Betsukomi, Kazehikaru and Seven Seeds, ended up moving over to the new publication, effectively making these two shoujo series josei series, despite both of them still having won shoujo manga awards. Flowers magazine is also where spin-offs of famous shoujo works have been published, such as Fushigi Yugi and Po Clan. Since the shift to josei began with shoujo mangaka, there's no visual identifiers to differentiate between shoujo and josei like there are shonen and shoujo. Many mangaka that work in josei often started out as shoujo mangaka or were working on josei at the same time. A big name josei mangaka, Aya Nakahara, who's worked on Dami no Watashi and Otona Najimi, might look familiar because she is also the mangaka of Lovely Complex. Her art has not changed much at all, despite the switch to digital bringing a couple differences. Most notably though, the only thing that has really changed is that most of her characters are more often working adults. Although their personalities and couple dynamics are often still the same banter-heavy comedy that Lovecom was. Other examples of shoujo mangaka that ended up growing up with their audience and making the switch to josei are authors like Aomi Mori, who worked on BODY and is now currently working on Dakishimete Suiden ni Kismo, or Chie Shinohara, who was the mangaka of Red River and is now making Yume no Shizuku. All in all, there's really no hard and fast rule that can distinguish a shoujo from a josei. The stories can often share similarities, the characters can be of any age or gender, and the content can range from pure to mature in either age demographic. You can probably just assume that a series about a working adult woman is going to be a josei, however, in some cases you may also be wrong. The most you could do to compare the two against each other would just be to take their most extreme examples to see the differences. For instance, a shoujo series like Kitchen Princess, which is so clearly made for a younger audience, isn't going to have anything in common with a spicy smut series, I Dream of Being Eaten by Enokita. With these two extremes, you can clearly denote which series is going to be for a young girl and which one is intended for adult women. But these examples are just that, extremes. You could probably argue that Jousei deals with life after marriage while Shoujo deals with life before marriage, but even then you still have a lot of cross examples between the two. Umi ga Hashiru End Roll is a shoujo series about a 60-year-old woman who is pursuing her passion for film after her husband died, and Chihaya Furu, which is a Jousei series, is about a high school girl that is pursuing her passion in karuta. And while Chihaya Furu is a Jousei, it is still considered a shoujo in Japan. The idea that these two demos hinge on marriage would also imply though that shoujo and Jousei are only about love and relationships, which this is obviously not true. There are a ton of sci-fi and action series that run in the Josei magazine Comic Zero Sum, like Dolls by Naked Ape or Bokura no Kiseki. One thing that can help in determining what is a shoujo versus what is a Jousei is looking at the original Japanese text. Most series that are intended for an older audience use furigana less frequently. Furigana is a reading aid for Japanese text that is most often used in works made for kids or in educational materials. So it would make sense that Jousei, which is intended for older audiences, wouldn't employ a reading aid like shoujo would. Furigana is also used less frequently for the older male demographic, seinen, as well. This way of distinguishing shoujo and Jousei can really only be done by people who can read in the original language and has no consequence on the Western audiences, which would only bring the English speakers back to square one on differentiating between the two demographics. So where does this leave us? We know there's such a thing as manga intended for adult women, but so often it's mixed together with shoujo that it can almost be pointless to even differentiate between the two. Personally, that's almost where I've landed, and often when I talk about the feminine media demographics, I just blend the two words together to say shoujosei. The two go hand in hand, one being the product of the latter. Both demographics inspiring the other to take aspects of what readers love from each. Growing up doesn't mean you lose your inner child, and being a kid doesn't mean you're not interested in serious topics. I often find that people are very quick to separate Jousei from shoujo as if Jousei is just inherently better, inherently more mature than shoujo could ever be. But if this video is any evidence, the two are blurred so constantly that to separate shoujo and Jousei as if they aren't two sides of the same coin is frustrating. Taking the shoujo out of Nana just because it simply deals with heavier topics is a disservice to the shoujo demographic. The same with taking the Jousei out of Namida Ame to Serenade just because the series is about a high school girl. Japan hardly even denotes whether something is a Jousei or not unless it's explicitly made for housewives and working women. Even then, the lines are blurred still because a series like Kids on the Slope, which is about high school boys, is considered to be made for an older audience. For Western audiences, Jousei has really just become kind of an arbitrary word that we give to any manga that has adult characters or problems in a feminine medium. This is a large problem in the American manga industry though, and I don't want it to seem like I'm saying we don't need these series. Many people want Josei manga or just adult women in manga because they don't feel seen in other demographics. Josei is the least popular demographic not only in Japan but in America as well. This despite the global commercial success of a series like Wotsukoi, which is considered to be a Jousei despite not having been published in a magazine. One reason could be that the demographic is just so new and that's why it's still less popular than the others. However, publishers have still just largely ignored that women still consume manga and anime even when they're adults. Recently though, there are publishers that are taking strides to correct this, like Kodansha and 7 Seas. Kodansha, while having most of these series locked behind digital jail, have been licensing so many series from Kiss and Be Love magazine lately. Series like these would include Changes of Heart, Mr. Bride, Untouchable Midori-kun, Burn the House Down, and My Wonderful World. On the other hand, you have 7 Seas that just launched their steamship imprint of spicy manga series for women. Some of the first manga that they licensed under this label were Game Between the Suits and Ladies on Top. 7 Seas is also the manga messiah to publish the wildly popular Do Not Say Mystery and ushering the return of Yumi Tamura to the States. Manga made for women in their early 20s and beyond will always have an audience that is just waiting to read more from this demographic. But due to companies overlooking the demand, Josei often gets forgotten about, just like shoujo. There are so many wonderful manga series that are just not available in English legally, or even for that matter, they're not available online through other means either, and it just leads people to think that Josei isn't popular. And oftentimes, the demographic is just forgotten about in conversations entirely. While the lines are blurred, like we talked about this entire video, the demographic is still clearly there. And it's not only just there is a demand as well. Hey, so I was listening to your whole video because I kind of like live in your walls after my wife kicked me out. But I think I understand what Jousei is now, and I really want to try my whole game show thing another time. Please, I think I really got it this time. Okay, but only if you stop living here. Sure thing. Sorry for the delay, my wonderful audience, but we are back again with the last question. Let's play. Is this a Jousei? I think this time we got it all squared away, and there's absolutely no way that I could mess this one up. For the next series, we have the Victorian romance manga, Emma by Kao. That's a seinen. Fuck.